All right. I see people entering the Zoom room. Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan, and I'm an event manager at Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live. Soon, I will drop a link in the chat for where you can order a copy of On Girlhood, 15 stories from the well-read Black Girl Library, straight from PNP's website. I'd also like to mention that these copies are signed. You can ask our speakers a question tonight by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can toward the end of the program, but we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address your question. Also, there are auto captions for this event by hitting the live caption button at the bottom of your screen as well. Let's introduce tonight's guests. Glory Edim is the founder of Well Read Black Girl, a book club and digital platform that promotes Black literature and sisterhood. She won the Innovators Award at the 2017 Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Edim will be in conversation with Christine Platt, a modern-day Renaissance woman, from serving as an advocate for policy reform to using the power of storytelling as a tool for social change. Christine's work reflects her practice of living with intention. She holds a BA in Africana Studies, an MA in African American Studies, and a JD in General Law. Christine has written over 24 literary works for people of all ages, including her latest title, The Afro-Minimalist's Guide to Living with Less. When she's not writing, Christine spends her time curating The Afro-Minimalist, a creative platform chronicling her journey to minimalism. Please give our guests a virtual round of applause.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I just put in the chat, thank you. Huge thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting me. Christine, thank you for hosting this conversation.
Of course.
I'm so grateful for you.
I am so happy to be here. And yes, thank you for everyone who's joining us tonight. We know that there's a lot of virtual events happening right now, and so you could be somewhere else, but you're here with us. And really hope you enjoy this conversation. Glory, first of all, I'm just so impressed just with everything that you've been able to do over these past few years with telling our stories. And this book, so for those of you who know Afro-Minimalist in me, you have to turn it at an angle like that so you can see trying to do better with my ebooks. You know, I have a lot of books going on. But this is beautiful. Like this is one of the books that I would love to have in print. I feel that it is just stories that all Black girls need, Black girls and Black women. And so let's hop right in. On Girlhood, 15 stories from the well-read Black Girl Library. And one of the first questions that I want to ask you is, like, why did you choose to structure the book this way? And for those of you who do not have the book, you definitely need to get the book, first of all. But then the way that the book is structured, it's broken into these specific categories, which is first, innocence; second, belonging; third, love; fourth, self-discovery, right? And then there's an epilogue by one of my faves, Zora Neale Hurston. So very curious if you could tell us all why you chose to structure the book in this way.
Yes. So this book for me is, it's my sophomore album. It's my second anthology. I'm very, very proud of it. And I had been thinking for a really long time about what would be the next pathway for the Well-Read Black Girl book series. And the idea of exploring girlhood was really important to me because this community is really a love letter to our younger selves and to future generations. And I was like really fixated on the word girl, like what that meant, how we could really support our younger selves and the girls that we once were. And so that brought me to coming of age stories. And I had read so many over the years. Most of us have read The Bluest Eye and The Color Purple, all these stories that are so iconic by Morrison and Walker. And I was thinking about just the the amount of trauma that those stories tend to hold,
Oof.
but also the nuance and the joy and the triumph they also like share
Yeah.
with us, and the resilience. And I really wanted something to kind of this collection to fixate on the complication of what it means to be a young Black girl. And when I was thinking of coming of age, all those things came to mind. So,
Yeah.
when you're growing up, you have all these different milestones, and you're discovering who you are, you're falling in love. And, there's one thing to fall in love with a romantic partner, but it's another thing to fall in love with yourself, and,
Yes.
develop self-trust and self-compassion. And then, belonging, like community
Right.
building, like where do you belong in the world? How do you see yourself? How do you advocate for yourself? So all these things kept coming up as I was reading the stories. So there were all these like through lines of coming of age and deciding the woman that you would become, the girl you are, and the woman that you would become. So like as I was reading, I read so many stories.
I can only imagine, like, I don't even know how you selected 15, which I'm sure that's another.
Oh yeah, that's another story. Honestly, like the backstory is I wanted this to be much bigger. I was thinking more of this kind of like dense 600-page book that would be, used in universities and colleges, that would have stories sorted by decade. That was my initial like proposal and idea. Like I really wanted to do like a whole dense like anthology.
Right.
And then as I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's so much to be shared. And I was like, I need more of a focus. Like I was like, I need to like narrow this down and have it be really pointed. So I left the idea of doing a timeline and doing it by decade. And I decided to really focus in on like the girls in the story. And what motivated me was after I reread one of my favorite short stories is Everyday Use by Alice Walker, which, it's a classic. Everyone has read it. And it has like the three perspectives from the mother, the sister, and the two sisters. One sister is more homely and she stays with her mother, and the other one's more worldly. She goes out, she's a little more fancy. And I was thinking about the two sisters. I was thinking the mother-daughter relationship. And I was just like, this is such a great like example of girlhood and like the idea of like growing into oneself and reflecting, like self-reflection. And that story kind of gave me like pause to be like, okay, like maybe I should focus on young women and what they're going through.
It was so interesting to sort of read some of these. I mean, some of these I haven't read since grad school, and I think what's so beautiful about our stories in particular is like reading them at different points of your life and pulling different things from them, right? Like a story that may have been inspirational, right, when you were younger, then becomes aspirational when you were older, right? Or a story that you understood what was happening there, but not really until you read it again later on in life and you're like, I know exactly what she was going through because this is what I'm going through, or this is what I went through, or this is what I survived, right? And so, I mean, again, I don't know how you picked the 15, but I think you did a beautiful job. And I think they all just show such varying aspects of what it is to be a Black girl and to be a Black woman and to sort of look at yourself through various lenses in your lifetime, right? And I'm in my 40s, as you know. And so this has been like a really big thing for me now, which is why the piece on self-discovery is so beautiful to me. And I'm scrolling. And one of the things, for me, self-discovery is just such an important part of not just girlhood, but also womanhood. And that was, I think, a very big epiphany for me, right? Because I think so much when we think of self-discovery, it's when you're young, it's when, and like, you're still figuring yourself out. And I'm like, oh, you're gonna be 40 and you're still gonna be figuring, figuring yourself out. And that's okay. And this is like a message that I've been sharing with my daughter, with other young women. As you know, one of my favorite quotes is like, I am not a grown woman, I am a growing woman, right? And may I always be growing and may I never be fully grown, right? This idea that we are constantly discovering and rediscovering parts of ourselves, right? So I'm really glad that you sort of honed in on that particular theme. I love all the themes, but I think that one was like the most powerful for me. And I love Edwidge Danticat, and I just,
She's, yeah, she is like I absolutely love her. I recently in 2020, I like reread all of her books like back to back just to be like immersed in her language because it is so lyrical and beautiful and she pulls you into the story. And I wanted to have like that story in particular. I wanted to have like stories from across the diaspora.
Yeah,
So some
yeah.
stories are
And that
set in New
story,
York or Haiti or
yeah,
Jamaica, and I think that Blackness is global and we're all connected in these different ways. And no matter where you live or where like you're rooted, these connections can be made. And
yeah,
I mean, I will say again, it was difficult to narrow it down to 15, but I was trying to even replicate the growing up. So the reason Jamaica
yes.
Kincaid is the first story is because, she's a young girl. You don't even hear the girl's voice until like the very last line. The girl says, well, what if I don't know, if I pick the wrong bread, like you just hear the mother's monologue. And I think that's often, at least for me, that's how it was, like just listening to my mom's voice and trying to like emulate and understand like the choices she was making and how that impacted me and if I should be, do the same thing, like the college you go to, the relationships you have, like all these things are so, they are so meaningful, especially when you're a young person. I agree with you.
I love that. And I love that you started with innocence and in particular, that particular story, because so much of who we are, is so rooted in our childhood. And I love that you said, like, you're trying, you're listening, you're like, do I emulate? Do I, like, what am I supposed to glean from this, right? There are parts of it that you don't really understand. There are parts of it that you question, right? But no matter what is told to you, so you get like all these little bits and pieces and stories, you still have to figure it out for yourself, right? For yourself. And for those of you, when we were talking about the Edwidge Danticat piece, that piece is called Seeing Things Simply, and it is absolutely beautiful. And I remember reading her work, The Farming of Bones, and it really just, that book was so beautiful and heavy, right? But I think that was the first book where I really sort of honed in on the diasporic sort of piece of our stories, right? And like really getting a full understanding of what that looks like and what blackness looks like here and what blackness looks like there and what our shared commonalities are and what, it's just so beautiful. I just want to read a little, that sort of like that first little snippet of Seeing Things Simply, where she says, this is why she wanted to make pictures, to have something to leave behind even after she was gone, something that showed what she had observed in a way that no one else had and no one else would after her. Go off mute, we can't hear.
No, it's so good because it's so true. It's like, it's what we want. That's, I think, what every person wants in their life is to leave legacy, to leave an impact, and it doesn't, it's really challenging now because of social media and technology and how that kind of interferes with our idea of what impact means. And it's like, it can be as simple as leaving a picture, and it can be as grand as, creating a community and having all these kind of like tangible things, or writing a book, but whatever it is and whatever you decide, that's your measure of success, and that's your it's meaningful and it's powerful, and you get to decide that, no one else does. And going back to the idea of self-discovery, but also self-validation, like you can't look outward for those things. It needs to be something that's internal and rooted in oneself and their values and their ideology. And I think we constantly have to remind ourselves, because as we grow and as we like learn new things and as our opinions and perspectives changes, those things change too, like we're not stagnant people. And I like absolutely love your quote, like, because I'm embodying it too, because if we are not grown, we are growing, we're constantly evolving, moving towards the things that we want,
and it takes so much pressure off, doesn't it? I felt like for so much of my young adulthood, it was like, oh, I need to be grown, you know, or a grown woman would not do that. You grown, you too grown to be making this mistake, or you're too, right. And like,
Right.
for me, removing that pressure of having to be grown and, you know, what that means, right? This idea that like, I can't make any mistakes. I have to make good decisions. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to have this, or I have to
Right.
have, it just takes so much pressure
It
off.
takes it off and it makes things not so black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It really shows the context of your life, and it makes you see that like, again, I love how you phrase it, because it just allows you for more self-reflection. So if something
Mm-hmm.
happens, you're like, okay, what is a lesson I'm supposed to be learning from this?
Yeah.
How is this
What is
making
the
me,
growth?
what's the
Yeah.
growth? Like, so that shift of perspective, you know, so if you have a failure, if you have a setback, it doesn't deter, like, it doesn't deter you. It doesn't make you like stop. It just gives you a
Mm-hmm.
pause. And
Yeah.
that allows you to like reset and start things anew. And I think a lot of the
Yeah.
stories do show that kind of reset, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my
So
favorite stories. Oh, sorry.
no, no, no. Go ahead. Tell us your
No, I was going
favorite.
to say one of my favorite stories is the Dorothy West story, because it's not
Yes.
necessarily two young girls, it's two
Mm-hmm.
elderly sisters, you know, at the end, towards the end of their like their life, like they're no
Yes.
longer in their 20s, they're very settled, and they're still reflecting and they're still growing. They're still
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
the things that they could achieve and the joy and or even the hardships they've had as young people and how it's changed them, you know. And I
Yeah.
included that because I'm like, this is what we're talking about. This is like the evolution of girlhood into womanhood. It doesn't
Yeah.
stop when you turn 18. It just
It
continues.
just
And it
does
creates a
not.
new, yeah, it just keeps going.
Yeah. And it shouldn't, which is what I tell my daughter and other young women, right? Like, you should never want to stop growing. It's like almost saying like, I don't ever want to stop learning. Right.
Right.
Like, that's how you should feel about the process. And I feel like we hear that all the time. Like, you should always be learning. You should, and it's like, and you should always be growing. Right.
Right.
And so it has really, you know, really helped me move forward. You know, in my life. My mom is older. I love the dynamics here too, I should add, you know, again, the way that you move through, right? Like, there's our childhood as we move through adulthood, and as we are still reflecting and growing even in our old age. And I'll share this story with you, and for those of you who are watching. And this is when my mom was in a senior apartment complex. I should also say, for if you are in your 40s, you are likely dealing with parents who are, you know, starting to be, you know, they can't do what they used to do, but they can
Right.
still do some things, right? And so my initial was like, oh, I got to get her in her senior, you know, the senior facility. And what happened was she was still too young to be in a senior
Mhm.
facility, right? But we didn't know this until we went through the process. So what she was, it was almost like she was in this space of seeing what was to come, which
Mm.
is not necessarily, it was not necessarily her story. It was not necessarily her journey, but how can you not be mindful of what is happening around you? So anyway, she tells me about this one woman who is in the facility. This woman is in her 90s, Glory. Okay. In her 90s, still got her little apartment, senior apartment, but it's still her apartment. And so she tells my mom, you know, up until I was 50 years old, I did everything I wanted to do. She said, I drank everything I wanted to drink. I smoked everything I wanted to smoke. I laid with whoever I wanted to lay with. Okay. And she said, when she got 50, she was like, wait a minute, I'm still here. Right. She's like, oh, I need to eat right. I need to like get myself together. And the part that stuck with me the most was her telling my mom, I never imagined that I could be around another 50 years. Right. So, like, never knowing, I think that's the thing too about growing, not grown, you know, having these stories reflecting on girlhood and womanhood, is you don't know where you are in your journey. And that always really stuck with me, because I was like, every year I'm like, this could be my half life. This could be my
It's so true though. And I really do follow the mantra, like trust the journey. Like I'm not wearing it now, but I have a bracelet that says that. So it's like trust the journey, because the best moments of my life have always been completely unplanned and unexpected. And I can make the list and I can do all those things where I can chart it out, but the way God works in my life, it's like, I just never know. And so I try to my best to be really, steadfast when it comes to process, but not allowing that to kind of, dictate how I move. Like when things pop up or there's, surprises or unexpected events, whether they're good or bad, I do my best to flow with it. And it allows me to be open to opportunities. And
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because we are both Capricorns and I know what a journey it is to get to this space, because we are planners, right?
Yes.
And like at a certain point you realize, okay, planning is really like, this could go this way, but you have to be open and fluid because life, but it took me a long time.
Well, trust me, I am turning 40 very soon. I can't wait to be in my 40s. I think it's going to be like the best decade.
Magical.
It took me, I would say, the last like 2 years, because I'm just like, why I plan things the way I want it, and then it doesn't. Even this book, like I said, I had a whole different idea, and my proposal was different, and I was like, really, I was sticking to like what I wanted originally, and it just wasn't working. Like I'm like, this isn't working. Like it's like I'm hitting some barriers. Like there has to be a new idea. It has to be more refined. And you're a writer, so I know you understand the process of editing and revision. And that's where the beauty of like new work comes in. It's not the first draft, it's not the second. It's like after draft, after draft, after draft. And that's when like you find the process. Like that's when you find the beauty of the work, So this definitely was a process, and eliminating things down to, it's like really cutting it. It's like a poem. Like you have to, sometimes you need to cut it down so it has the essence really shows itself, and it's not, it's not regurgitating the same things over and over. It's like feels fresh, it feels very clear. And I'm really proud of the book because I do feel like it has a very clear viewpoint, and it does show the richness of our stories and how and through the generations. Like my favorite story is the one by Toni Morrison too. I have so many favorite stories. Like I mean, they're all so wonderful, but I was so happy to include Toni Morrison's story, which is like the only short story that she published. And including the epilogue of Zora Hurston, which is kind of like a surprise at the end, but it's not necessarily a short story, it's an essay, but I just loved how she spoke about her girlhood and her just like her audacity, thinking like another thing that I included was the year every short story was written, because I think like it's so important to give context to the historical record and like the things that were happening in society when these books were written. Like, so if you think about when, Zora Neale Hurston essay was written, and like, she still was so proud and bold and courageous in her being. But, the world around her was not loving her, but she still had her perspective. And so I try, or even Toni K. Bambara's story, The Lesson, is just like, classic story, and makes you, now that I'm a new mom, I'm like really trying to impart these lessons on my son, and like trying to really think about the world that he's growing up in. And I love that story because the young people in that story are so sharp and astute, and the teacher is trying to be a little bit condescending, but the kids know, like I like to think that young people have agency and they're going to be able to make their own decisions, and we don't have to like project our ideas. We can just nourish them and like point them in the right direction and allow them to make their own choices.
I love that you say that, because that was going to be one of my questions for you, which is like, which story or which stories like really resonated with you at this point in your life, right? Because again, I think that there are times when I can, read some of these and it's just like, oh, this is speaking to me, right? And then there are also times I'll read a story, whether it's new or something that I read before, but I'm able to receive it very differently because of where I am in my life, or maybe it awakens something. So I'm curious to know if there were any stories that were like, that really spoke to you or awakened something in you, during this particular moment in your life.
I mean, there were so many. I think that in the belonging section, I have this story by Camille Acker called Who We Are. And it's a
Mhm.
short story. I mean, they're all short stories, but it's like literally like takes 2 pages. And she is an incredible, rising star in the literary space. And this story is based in Washington, D.C., where I'm originally from. And the young girls are feisty and they have such energy. And, they're causing a ruckus. They're out in these like D.C. streets. So she named particular places I was familiar with, like the slang
Yeah.
and the stories felt very familiar to me. And as I said, like I'm a new mom, and
Yeah.
the moments where my son is like reaching his rebellion or reaching the point where he's like, he's not gonna be like, no child is perfect, but he's not always gonna be a saint,
Right.
and that story made me think about when I was young and I was rowdy and I was like, doing the most
Yeah.
in public. My mom
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
seen me and been like, what are you doing?
Right. Right.
And it just made me think about like those moments young people are trying to find themselves and like really like assert their agency and assert their power. Like it's something really, and
Mhm.
I do it now, like when I'm out like on the metro or in the subway in New York, I'm just like looking at young people, how they interact, how they're like pushing boundaries.
It's such a different time too. I have this conversation with my daughter all the time because you can see just the shift with one generation, and there would be things that I would allow her to do or things that, she'd be allowed to explore and say, right? Even with her playing the violin, I would say
Mhm.
like, grandmommy, had I told grandmommy that I wanted to go to school to play the violin, she'd have been like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, right. And like just the freedom
Yep.
that they have right now, which is a whole nother conversation because I think it's so generational, right?
Mhm.
I think your parents' generation, they remember the restrictions and limitations that they had. And
Right.
so they do not want that for you, right? And
Mhm.
then I remember the restrictions and limitations that I had, and then I don't want that for my daughter, right? And so like it's
Exactly. It's
like
like,
seeing generationally just like literally this liberation that is
yes,
happening. And I think it is especially true for Black children, right? I can't even
yes.
just say Black girls. I just think like Black children in general. And I just love seeing free Black children,
Yes.
right? And I feel like our generation, that we were on the cusp of freedom. Our parents were still like, oh, we don't want you to be too free, right? And understanding that those things are often rooted in love and in
Yes.
protection, right? We
Um,
talk about Tommy Orange, they're there all the time. And I think one of the most pivotal parts of that book for me is literally the introduction, right? With him
mhm.
giving just this history and getting us to understand that like a lot of who we are and a lot of what our ancestors imparted on us
Mhm.
was for our own survival, right? And so I
Yes.
always like to say, I was on the cusp of freedom. My mom was like, oh, we can't let you be too free because we know the
Right.
dangers that come.
And the
I'm gonna
thing
let
is,
you go because I
most
could
of
like
those,
go on. This is so
it's so
deep for
crazy
me.
because most of those restrictions and most of that fear is tied to capitalism. So it's like you can't
Girl.
be in a creative field because you might not have enough money to pay your rent, Like it's
Yeah.
like that fear
How
with
are you
it.
gonna eat? How are you gonna survive? Right. Or even
Yeah.
telling kids what they can and can't do. I mean, Clint Smith has a beautiful piece on just like wanting to play with the water gun. I wish I could remember the name of the poem, but it's
Yeah.
a poem that he did. His friends were outside playing with the water gun.
Mhm.
And it's that moment in your childhood when you realize, like, oh, I can't do
I can't
what other
do. Yeah.
children do, right? Because for my survival,
Right.
you can't play with a toy gun.
Right.
Your white friends can, but you can't, right?
Yes.
You can't
And
play a
it's so
violin because you may not be able
disheartening,
to.
but it's
It
like it's
is,
disheartening, but it's the truth. And
but
those,
generationally, look
yes,
at what has happened,
right.
right? And so, like, I think, again, like,
Mhm.
we can explore this girlhood and womanhood. I feel like, again, it's its whole separate sort of being, right? Especially
Yep.
in terms of our bodies, in terms of like love and to all these, which I love. Also, we need to touch on that. Let me see how much time we have left because I got to make sure we touch on that love piece, right? But just thinking about what has been able to be dismantled and liberated generationally, to me is beautiful, which is what I think you do in the 15 stories that you selected. I think you did such a
Oh,
beautiful
thank
job
you. I think
in
that that
showing
was,
that.
you know, that was like the essence of like this idea of freedom. And again, with the Camille Acker story, like even though the students are being unruly and they're being themselves, they're being teenagers, like at the end of the day, what it's connected to is their own liberation and their own freedom to fail and make mistakes and be a little bit messy, you know, like fighting against the perfectionism and being just like genuine people. And I think that we all, especially Black children, deserve that freedom. And also young girls, young Black girls being seen as girls and not as like grown women, you know? That was so important to me, to show all these different perspectives of that, you know, coming of age and those moments of just innocence and being delicate and trying to figure out, you know, like just their these small like vulnerabilities. What's so special about the short story too is it's not plot heavy, you know, it really is the internal conversation, the internal dialogue, like what the young girls
read
thinking.
A little bit? Can you read a little bit for us?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. And I suggest that one because it's super short. The short story.
Yes.
Like,
well, my dedication is for Black girls now and always. Yes, and I also included Nikki, one of my favorite poets of all times, Nikki Giovanni, and she has this poem called "The First Memory of Librarians," and all those books, another world, just waiting at my fingertips. And so, anytime I walk into a library, I think of just like that poem and that exploring. But I'll read a short thing from my introduction.
Okay, and then once you're done, I will get to our first question. So I'm going to go on mute. So you.
Okay, so I'll go. Okay. With this anthology, I'm seeking to illuminate the narrow space between Black girlhood and Black womanhood. This is not a finite list of stories on Black girlhood. It is simply a starting point. I want to attest to the worthiness of Black girls as they come of age, their need for protection, love, and freedom. This is something I've sought to do with my organization, Well Read Black Girl, which tirelessly works to address and improve society by reading and reflecting on the works of Black women. When selecting a book for our nationwide book club, I'm drawn to the possibilities for individual expression within varied storylines and distinct characters. Ultimately, my hope is that each narrative reveals the complex exterior worlds and interior lives as experienced, imagined, and seen through the eyes of Black girls. Today, decades after buying my first book, I feel so proud of the handpicked stories in this collection. They are short stories that have brought my life so much meaning, and I firmly believe each story is worthy of deep reflection and celebration. When you look over your own library, who do you see? For many Black and Brown readers, collecting stories that reflect our life experiences help us create new worlds where we can fully control the narratives. As a student at Howard University, I was looking for myself on the page, and the search has never ended. I continue to yearn for the mundane, the painful, and the beautiful, all the facets of one becoming. I look for stories to remind myself that no matter how the landscapes may change, we are all faced with the same issues when finding our purpose. Issues of love, loss, self-doubt, and everything else that makes life full of meaning. I'll stop there.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
So we have our first question, and they are anonymous. Hi, anonymous attendee. They asked, what short story did you want to include in the collection that you weren't able to, and why? Okay, so we're not going to go through I know you had so you started with this timeline. So maybe let's start with you're narrowing it down. You got it down to 20. You're like, man, I can only do 15. So let us know.
Okay, so listen, I was going to, so many stories I wanted to include, but the two that really broke my heart were, I was trying to just include any story by ZZ Packer because she is the queen of all things. And I love Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. It's such a classic, iconic short story collection. Brownies is something that I read pretty early on in my I think I probably read it in high school, but I for sure read it in college. And it's just such a beautiful book, but woo, let me tell you, if you guys don't know about the permissions process, the stores are expensive with good reason, but they are very expensive. So I had to I was going back and forth, but I just couldn't afford it. And same thing with Ann Petrie. I wanted to include a beautiful story by Ann Petrie. I was reading story after story. But it was just way out of my budget. Some stories can be for one story, it could be $10,000. That's not unheard of,
Yeah, especially some of these older stories, because you are literally working with the estate of some of these writers.
Right. And it's such a delicate balance going back and forth and making sure that, you have the permissions correctly. And I have so many anthologies from, the 70s and 80s. I like to collect anthologies in general. And usually when you read the back, it's permission from the author. Back in the day, that was the thing. Maya Angelou would give Mary Baraka permission, and Morrison would give, Gwendolyn Brooks permission. They were just swapping things. That is no longer the case.
That is not how it works anymore.
It does not work that way anymore. So those are the two things that really broke my heart. But I feel I will find another way in the future to really highlight their work and, just talk about, especially with ZZ Packer. Actually both of them. Because ZZ Packer is still writing and such an incredible professor and still just active. So I hope to work with her one day. If
maybe
you're watching out there, if anybody knows ZZ Packer, don't call me.
Yes, maybe I can do an event together.
I love that.
I think too, along those same lines, I think what is beautiful, it's also heartbreaking that you couldn't include every story, but I think what's also beautiful about that is that there are so many stories, right? And what was exciting to me is thinking about someone picking up this book and maybe seeing, oh, I know Zora Neale Hurston, oh, I know Toni Morrison, but who is Rita Dove, right? And those of us who are in this space, these are names that we're very familiar with, but thinking about someone picked up this book and this is the first time they heard of some of these authors, right? And thinking about how curious it may make readers to what other stories haven't I heard from Black women, right? And so one of the reasons why I asked, I don't know how you narrow this down, is because I know that there are so many of our stories that have never been told. Been told or shared. It's so great.
You're so right, because what I did try to do is do a pairing. So okay, I know Morrison, I know Walker, I know Kincaid, I know Edward Endicott, I know these people, but do you know Camille Acker? Do you know Alexia Authors? Do you know Dana Johnson? There's so many incredible contemporary writers that are doing their due diligence. And Dana Johnson's Melvin in the 6th grade, classic story. It's so beautiful. So good. So wonderful.
That's in the love section, y'all.
Isn't it? It just
Gwendolyn Brooks. Oh my goodness. I also even know, I don't know how you picked from Gwendolyn Brooks' collection. I heard her poem, The Mothers, the other day, and literally heard it in a completely different way. And I was I think I'm about to start crying, right? Because the first time I heard it, I was not a mother. And so it was sad, but it just hit me very differently. It hit me very differently thinking about Texas. It hit me, you know what I mean? I was just whew, this is some heavy stuff, right? So I think what's beautiful is, yes, you did what you had to do to pick the 15, but then also thinking about how curious it will make other readers, what else is out there. We have so many stories, we have so many narratives, we have so many, ancestral writers and contemporary writers, right, whose works, may not have been as prominent as some of the names that we are so familiar with, right? And so I love that you did do that sort of mix of I'm gonna throw in some names that y'all know, but I'm gonna also throw in some names that are you about to go look up their books and see how you can read some more work,
I want.
Right?
like throughout all the well-read Black girl, that really is my goal. Like, I want people to be curious. I want people to investigate. I want them to just like, see a name, because that's how I do things. So people might think like, oh, she's a little bit all over the place, but that is how I discover things. Like, I will be, on the internet, I'll be in the library, I'll be in the archive, and I'll just go in with no set destination, but just like to read and to discover new things.
Yeah.
That's what leads me to find these incredible stories. Like, and I don't know how many people knew that, Rita Dove actually had written a short story collection. Like, most people just know her through her poetry. And so that she has that one short story collection that I had to like dig through to find, or, so those things, those like the fun, like Easter eggs or surprises I like to put in my work. So it feels like, I'm really in there looking for things so I can share them and they don't get lost. Because this could be another conversation, but there is so much digital or like erasure that's happening and like loss of archives. So, my work is connected to kind of always keeping those stories alive and present.
Yeah. That was sort of like, yes, we have one more question. It's interesting that you said that though, because that's sort of the reason I started writing, was like, I wanted to tell the stories that had never been told. Like, we keep hearing the same stories, right? Okay. So our next question. Someone says, congrats on the book and podcast. You started from t-shirt to literary business empire. What is next? ?
I love that. I don't know if I'd call it an empire just yet, but I thank you so much for believing in me and helping me manifest that. So the next thing for sure for 2022 is going to be really growing the podcast, making sure that it has the absolute best guests. Please subscribe. It's on through Pushkin, anywhere you can get podcasts, either Apple, Spotify, all those places, wherever you listen to podcasts. So download it. It's coming in February 2022. We have a trailer up now, and our list is like so dynamite. I can't drop any names just yet, but it's gonna be good. It's gonna be so much fun. And I'm just hoping and keeping the conversations going, growing the book club further. I really would love when we can gather in person again to do like retreats and do like writing events like in person. So once it's safe and we have like new worlds, we can reimagine how we connect each other. That's something I'm going to pursue further. Like, I would really like to do a retreat in 2022. Like
I would love that. I would love that.
You're going to get an invite.
You don't have to invite me. I'm going to show up.
Listen, that's going to be a master class, because I need some minimalism in my life. Okay. I do.
I got you. I love that the podcast is going to be able to expand these conversations, because I think, there's so much that we want to ask writers, aspiring writers, those who have, really been in the literary world and in the literary game for a long time. And I think sometimes there's just not enough time to sort of like have those conversations, or to answer the DM, or to respond to the comment, right? And so what I'm looking forward to with the podcast is to really like seeing you dig in with some of these folks, right? And like ask these questions and like really get us, just really ingrained in the process. And because everyone has a different process, right? So how they go about their writing, how they choose to sort of tackle some of the topics that they tackle. Like, it's going to be, I cannot wait. So I am ready to tune in.
You're going to be a guest too. Okay. Like, it's all coming. We're going to be doing craft. We're going to be talking about process. We're going to be talking about pop culture, politics, all the things.
It's going to be amazing. And for those of you who don't know, Glory and Well-Read Black Girl, my very, very first novel was actually self-published. It was indie published. And it just, listen, what I learned is that readers don't care, right? Like, readers don't care who the publisher is. They wanted a good story. but I think that sometimes there, at least back then, there was, you know, a little bit of stigma around that.
Yeah.
And the truth about Awiti started to like get buzz, and colleges were picking it up, and these, you know, and I just remember you being like, before everybody was like, what's the truth about Awiti? Who is Christine Platt? You were like, so we're Black girls going to be reading the truth about Awiti. And I was like, what? You know? And so I think like there's also so much power in sort of understanding how we can collectively share our stories, right? Yes. Like your platform, I think, has been so powerful, not just for writers, but also for readers, right? And introducing them to, again, so many bodies of work, and really getting them to dig in deep and have discussions, whether online, you know, I know you have little pockets of well-read Black girl book clubs all over the country, right? But I think, you know, what this time has shown us, and again, I cannot wait until we can be in person again safely. But I think it has also allowed us to really sort of hone in on what do I really want to share, show, tell. And now we have, you know, almost a wider audience, right? Because it is virtual. So I've seen a lot of Black creatives sort of lean into this space. And I love that you have been one of the people to do that. And I love that it has expanded not only to this book on girlhood, but also to a podcast and all of the many exciting things that you have coming for us. I also love when people ask like, what's next? Because it is such a publishing question. It's like,
it really is. Well, you know,
we're ready.
So it's like, I'm trying. But I am very excited for it. I really do feel like 2022 is going to be my year, like in the way that I feel just more like grounded, because I feel like so much has been happening.
Because you're almost 40. You're almost 40. I know it sounds super cliche.
I'm ready though.
But for anyone who is watching, who is also on the cusp of 40, I remember telling one of my friends, I'm going to tell this story to you now, Glory. So it's, first of all, it's important to have friends that are younger than you, and it's important to have friends that are older than you, and they can all just teach you a lot of things, right? And so this is one of my older girlfriends, and so she had already hit her 40 mark, and I was like, yo, I don't know what I'm feeling. Like I would hear people talk about this 40 thing, and I'd be like, so cliche, so foolish. How you feeling something you turn, right? You know? And I said, but I am feeling something. Like, what do I really want to do? What do I want to be intentional about? How am I going to live the rest of my life? Like, what am I doing? And what she told me is what I'm going to tell you. She said, you know, when you're about to turn 40, it's almost as if your heart, your mind, your body, your spirit, every aspect of you knows that if I'm lucky, I have lived half my life. And you become very intentional about how you spend the next half. And it's very true, right? And so I'm very excited to see what 39 and 40-year-old Glory, you know, has for us. But I think, again, it goes back to this, again, on girlhood, right? This growing, not grown, this learning and self-discovery. And I do think that there are moments that are more pivotal in our lives than others. And, you know, for some people, it's guided by an age range, right? For others, it may be guided by a milestone like motherhood or graduating from college, right? And I think it's important to also like look ahead. So I look at like a lot of older women and listen to their stories. And, you know, you hear people say like, I mean, my body is getting older, but my spirit is still 25. My spirit has been 25 since I was 25, right? And just like, you know, again, collecting all of these stories and reading it in that way and sort of realizing like we are also our own life story, I think is like just super powerful. I'll let you respond.
I'm gonna look, I can't wait to like replay this and write down that quote from your friend. I love that. It does feel like I do feel this shift, and I can see it, you know, coming alive in my work. I can see it happening in my personal life. And I do just want, like, I'm ready this, because you're right, this is like half of my life,
Yeah.
and it's so funny
Yeah.
too, because Black don't crack, so people are like, are you 19? People like, people
Yeah.
never know my age. And so I've been even being intentional about like speaking it out, like, I'm going to be 40. I'm an adult. I'm an adult. I'm not an intern.
Yes.
So just embracing that. And I'm just ready. I'm ready for more books and more experiences and all those things. And I just love to be part of our publishing community. It's such a warm and loving space. And it introduced me to you and so many other incredible authors. So I'm just like really in gratitude.
So here's my question. I guess this might be my last question. I'll see if we have any more Q&A. But what would 38-year-old Glory tell 8-year-old Glory? Wait, you're on mute.
That is such a good question. Okay. I would tell 8-year-old Glory to not give up, keep trying, even when things are difficult and there's setbacks and there's things that make you doubt yourself. Cut that out and really sit with trust and self-love and give yourself hugs and just be really gentle with yourself. Because I think
okay, nope, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
When I was 8, I think I had like my little perfectionism was kind of like starting to bud, and it stopped me from doing things and like closed me up early. And it took me until I got into college to kind of like stop doing that and be more like just,
which was my next question. So that's what you would tell 8-year-old Glory. What would you tell 18-year-old Glory?
Oh, 18-year-old Glory. Okay. So 18-year-old
She's like,
Glory.
oh, okay,
now we have to get down to I would probably say save for retirement earlier. Like, so you're going to do this creative life, open up that 401k when you get that first job. I would probably give her some more like financial advice. And I would also tell her to, because I feel like 18-year-old girl took a lot of risk. And so I would tell her all those risks you're taking, they're going to be worth it. You might not see like the end just yet, but like keep being a risk taker, keep like dreaming really big, and continue that spirit of like generosity and curiosity. I do feel like that's like my superpower. Like being curious is like my superpower for sure.
18-year-old me was so serious. I think a lot of y'all know me as like, fun-loving Christine, but like it took a lot for me to sort of like break out of that, This is like my 8-year-old self was free, which is why I like asked you that, right? Because there's something that sort of happens between, again, which I think you capture, the essays that you chose and the short stories that you chose capture this very nicely. There's something that happens between this innocence of being young and then this coming of age in terms of like, 18, 21. And I have thought back, I'm like, what? I was so serious. It was like, I have to do this work and I have to get these degrees and I have to do, and I was just like, dang, girl, you should have had some more fun. I ain't had no fun. We have another question coming in.
Oh, okay.
All right. So we have, being a Nigerian American woman writer, do you have plans for more African women's stories? Thank you for everything you two do. Thank you so much. I love that.
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually do have, I do read a lot of stories from the continent, writers, and I have an idea that I'm still trying to like flesh out. But I think it's so important to be in like, because I live here in the States and I go back home to visit family, I go to Nigeria to visit family, but I haven't been there like long enough to really know like the publishing space and community. But I do love this one platform. It's called Brittle Paper. I'll actually throw it in the chat because everyone should definitely follow them, because she does a great job of helping identify emerging African writers and just like African literature in general. So follow her on social media, on Instagram. Let me put it here in the chat.
And my first book was all about, it was so, because I had not even been to the continent yet. And I would hear from people and they were like, when did you go to Africa? This was my village. This was, and I'm like, I have never been. So that's a whole nother conversation about blood memory.
It's so essential, but I think in terms of like the community building and meeting people, like there's amazing retreats and festivals. And I would like to find a way to connect those communities and like travel more, maybe like even doing like a retreat in Nigeria. I do have aspirations.
Yes.
You know, just takes a little bit more work.
Amazing.
It's definitely like on my list though. Thank you for asking that question. And my memoir too, that's coming out in a couple of years, in a year and a half, it does talk more about just my Nigerian heritage and my love of reading and how my parents instilled that into me, and just being first generation, what that means and what that looks like. So thank you.
Wait to read that.
And I see Morgan's back. She's like, it's time for y'all to go.
Morgan is like, y'all, it's time. This was wonderful, Glory. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're the best. I love you.
So forward to what is to come, and really looking forward to hearing about your journey as a Nigerian American. I mean, I feel like I know bits and pieces, but I think we will all benefit from knowing like how this has impacted your journey and also even led you to us with Girlhood, Black Girl, and of course, I'm not going to hold up my tablet, but on Girlhood. Thank you, Glory. Hold up the book. Thank you for this beautiful anthology, and we are just all so very grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting. Your questions were amazing. It's always such a pleasure talking to you and learning from you. So I'm so grateful. And thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Politics and Prose.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Politics and Prose.
No problem. I mean, I love having both of you come and speak and, you know, be friends of the store. So on the behalf of the store, thank you, Glory, for having this event, especially after your huge festival. Thank you, Christine, for also taking time out to host this event with us. And thank our audience for continuing to join our events. Please purchase On Girlhood from Politics and Prose. The link is in the chat. The books are signed, and we have signed copies at all 3 locations if you'd rather go and shop in person. And on that note, I wish everyone a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.